This interview with Dr. Alan Hazelton took place in Goulburn, New South Wales on the 15th of March 1991. As Major Hazelton, NX 35134, Dr. Hazelton was a member of the 2nd 10th Field Ambulance and was SMO to D-Force.
Having been in Taso for some time, and the Speedo being on the line, the Japanese were concerned that there was a hospital camp at Konyu, and they were dying at the rate of 8 and 9 a day in this place. I think there were about 700 troops in it that couldn't do any work, and they had 2 outlying camps which the workers came from, but as they got sick they came into this other camp, and because they were dying, for some reason the Japanese decided that an Australian doctor might be better, and they shanghaied me up there, which was rather a hair-raising experience to get there anyway, but I can tell you later. When I arrived in the camp, it was the most depressing place I'd ever been in. It was the usual huts with ADAP roofs, and lots of spaces between them, plenty of rain, and everything was in a mess. We had nothing in the way of drugs or medicaments or really any facilities at all. What does one do? The whole of the medical equipment I had was a small carton which had 3 bottles of Condy's fluid in it and a couple of bandages, and that's about all. So I said, righto now, you go and get bamboos, and there was all this bamboo around the place, and it was about 4-inch diameter bamboos, and I suppose 18 inches between the joints, and we cut them and made water carriers. And I said, now you get bamboos and go up and you wash all your mates that are in the camp up there that can't get up. And suddenly the morale of the camp, from being abysmal, just rose like that, because they had somebody to whom they could turn, somebody who was telling them what to do with probably common sense, and then they had their mates to look after that were too ill, and they had a purpose in life, if you could have such a thing there. So I felt that medicine reflects a relationship between people. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a handful of pills to be dishing out right, left and centre. You can achieve a tremendous amount by just being human.
Reflecting on the times way back when you were captured as a prisoner of war, doing all you could to save those men.
Dr. Jacob Markowitz, who was a Canadian surgeon who came into our camp following capture, he'd discuss topics of physiology, which we found very useful in keeping our minds alert and trying to keep up to date with what we'd learnt, and recollecting things that we had in our minds and that maybe under the stresses of the time had forgotten. He was very good at this. He was quite an artist, and he drew beautiful diagrams of anatomy and physiology, and we used to sit there watching. Unfortunately, some of the Japanese watched as well, and they dragged him off and accused him of planning an escape and working out maps for escape routes, and our physiological meetings were banned from then on. Another interesting facet, that the day the Japanese told us a big bomb had been dropped on Japan, which was just prior to the end of the war, he gathered us together and he said, I think I know what this is about. And he gave us a rundown of splitting the atom and how they'd been working on an atom bomb before he left Canada. And he felt sure that this was the bomb that they dropped on Japan, and of course, as it turned out, it was. So we were quite isolated from the world, and yet we had this fund of knowledge carried by Markowitz, which really kept most of us on the ball. We were depending on the food that we'd carried out to Changi. We were seeing cases of edema of the legs and probably early beriberi. It happened very, very quickly, mainly because we were starving, and I'd never been so hungry. We were rationing the food out, and then the Japanese gave us rice, and I think that precipitated it, because it sopped up whatever vitamin B reserves we had with a high carbohydrate diet. And Peter Henry, who you're aware of, he went in on one of the working parties to the Great World, and they were involved in this emptying warehouses and that, and they came across a lot of food, and as hard as they could, they'd put a bit aside and get it out to Changi whichever way they could, and I think Peter did a tremendous job. People that actually were catatonic and completely deeply depressed, and other people that were wildly excited, and they virtually had to be restricted. And we had a bamboo compound with a hut in it that they used to be there, and people being with them all the time. The other interesting experience in Tarso was we had 2 cholera epidemics while I was there, and both an English medical officer and myself looked after these cholera people, and we had cholera vaccine. We vaccinated as many troops as we could with it, and I don't know if you've ever seen cholera, but it's the most dramatic condition in medicine, I think. While you're looking at a person, they shrink up and die in front of you, and their bowels will open and buckets and buckets of fluid will come out. It's just unreal. We lost a lot of them with their initial dehydration, but some of them survived. In other parts on the river, they made up transfusion apparatus and boiled up salt and river water, and a lot of them were rehydrated, but unfortunately about 10 days later quite a number of them died from the kidney shutdown they got at the original hydration, and they died from renal failure. So overall I would think that whichever camp we were in, the mortality was about the same, either sooner or later. And I don't know how many transfusions I gave. I had some rubber tubing and I had my needle from the syringe. We collected the blood in an aluminium milkshake thing, you know, they make, and we defibrillated the blood with a bamboo that we hammered and boiled and stirred and got all the fibrin out of the blood, and that kept it liquid, and then we poured it in through a funnel in through the thing. I actually made a sort of drip chamber out of bits and pieces that I got there, so I was able to regulate the amount of blood that I gave people and the speed with which they got it. And I was walking in mud up to my knees. It was a frightful experience, that dreadful black mud, and I happened to hit a little camp, and who should I run across but Ernie Marsden, who was a doctor, and he was the deputy medical superintendent at Prince Alfred when I was a resident there. And we saw each other and we greeted each other like lost brothers, and we sat on a log and we just cried. It was so unusual, you know, out in the wild as I am, nobody else about, just Ernie and I. When we got into the prisoner of war camp towards the latter years, owing to the deficiencies of the diet and hardships and recurring infections, no doubt, with the toxemias that occurred with them, we did get a large amount of eye trouble. When we went back to Changi, we were all crowded up, and then we got the orders to go up on the railway. I was with a lot of the men out of my company, but they were sent across to Borneo, the company, and I was left behind in Changi, and they all perished on that march in Borneo.
A bowl of rice for some while working through the night and day, blistered hands and feet building the Burma Railway. You saw it all, those fighting for a second chance, second 10th Field Ambulance.
Yes, and I think one goes through these experiences and it reflects on the way one goes on through life. It's been of tremendous value to me having a number of men to look after and very little with which to do it, and I don't ever feel like going for the exotic when the more fundamentals can help in medicine.